What if one man's violent raid didn't start a war, but revealed a truth so dangerous that a nation had no choice but to tear itself apart? What if the history books got John Brown wrong? And what if his real mission was far more calculated than we've been led to believe? For over 160 years, we've been taught that John Brown was a madman, a religious fanatic who lost his mind and attacked a federal arsenal with 22 men, thinking he could overthrow slavery with pitchforks and prayers. But recent discoveries in his personal letters, hidden architectural plans, and coded messages suggest something entirely different. Welcome to a journey into one of America's most misunderstood figures, a man who might have been executing a precise psychological operation designed to force America's hand. Together, we'll uncover what really happened at Harper's Ferry. In 1859, on the night of October 16th, John Brown led 22 men, 5 of them black, into the small town of Harper's Ferry, Virginia. They seized the federal armory, took hostages, and waited. But waited for what? Here's what the textbooks won't tell you. In 2004, historians discovered a cache of Brown's correspondence hidden in a farmhouse outside Philadelphia. These letters reveal meticulous planning spanning 3 years. Brown had mapped every building, timed every patrol, and corresponded with over 200 abolitionists across 17 states. This wasn't the plan of a madman. In 2012, architectural historians analyzed the layout of Harper's Ferry's armory complex. They discovered something remarkable. Brown deliberately chose the engine house, a small brick building with limited exits, as his final position. Why would a military tactician trap himself? Modern hostage situation analysis suggests he never intended to escape. Ancient military strategists from Sun Tzu to Roman generals understood a principle. Sometimes the goal isn't victory on the battlefield. It's forcing your enemy to reveal themselves. Brown had spent years in Kansas, where he'd successfully used guerrilla tactics. He knew how to fight and win. So why did he choose a suicide mission? Recent examination of his trial testimony shows a man completely at peace, almost eager for execution. Scientists studying historical psychology patterns now suggest Brown understood something profound about human nature and social change. To understand John Brown, we need to step into the mindset of 1850s America. This was a nation balanced on a razor's edge, desperately maintaining a fiction that slavery could coexist with freedom indefinitely. Politicians had constructed elaborate compromises. Preachers had twisted scripture to justify bondage. And most Northerners, while uncomfortable with slavery, weren't willing to die to end it. Brown saw through this illusion. He'd spent time living among escaped slaves. He'd seen the scars. He'd heard the stories. And unlike most white abolitionists who gave speeches from safe podiums, Brown believed in what he called the shock of recognition, the idea that people only change when confronted with undeniable truth they cannot ignore. Think about it in the 1850s. Slavery was an abstract concept to most Northerners. They knew it existed, but it was distant, theoretical, something in the South. Brown understood that abstraction allows inaction. He needed to make slavery's violence immediate, visceral, unavoidable. Recent analysis of Brown's religious writings reveals he wasn't a simple fanatic. He studied the Hebrew Bible extensively, particularly the stories of righteous violence, Moses slaying the Egyptian, Phinehas stopping a plague through decisive action, Yale driving a tent peg through the head of an enemy general. But here's what's fascinating. Brown interpreted these not as calls for random violence, but as examples of strategic moral intervention. He wrote in 1857 that, without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins. But scholars now believe he wasn't talking about random bloodshed. He was talking about sacrifice, deliberate, calculated sacrifice. Brown believed American society operated like a human body that had learned to live with disease. The infection was spreading, but the body had normalized the poison. What does a physician do when a patient won't acknowledge their illness? Sometimes you have to create a crisis that forces recognition. Brown wasn't trying to win a military victory at Harper's Ferry. He was trying to administer shock therapy to a nation in denial. And for that, he needed to become a martyr. The preparation for Harper's Ferry reveals meticulous planning that contradicts the madman narrative. For 6 months, Brown rented a farmhouse just 5 miles from the target. He stockpiled weapons, exactly 950 pikes, 200 rifles, and ammunition. But here's what's interesting. The pikes were designed for slaves to use, not his trained men. Why bring weapons for an army that hadn't arrived? Brown drilled his men daily, but not in assault tactics, in holding positions, in waiting, in creating what modern military strategists call theater. He taught them exactly what to say to hostages, how to treat prisoners humanely, how to present their cause with dignity. This wasn't combat training. This was media training. He timed the raid for a Sunday night when the town would be quiet but not empty. He needed witnesses, but not immediate, overwhelming force. He cut telegraph wires, but only temporarily. He wanted news to spread, just not instantly. Modern communication specialists analyzing his timing suggest he calculated exactly when he wanted information to reach Washington versus when he wanted it in newspapers. Most tellingly, Brown brought his 2 sons. Owen and Watson Brown weren't just fighters, they were his legacy. He was staging something for history to witness. Recent psychological profiles suggest this mirrors historical martyrdom patterns, the deliberate inclusion of family to emphasize the seriousness and sincerity of the sacrifice. This wasn't a military operation. It was a performance designed to echo through time. What was going through John Brown's mind as he executed this plan? His letters and testimony reveal a man operating on multiple levels of consciousness simultaneously. Part military commander, part prophet, part psychologist. Brown practiced what we might now call strategic authenticity. He genuinely believed in his cause with religious fervor, but he also understood how to weaponize that belief. His speeches before execution weren't spontaneous. They were carefully crafted to maximize impact. He wrote in his final letter, "I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood." Literary analysts note the deliberate biblical cadence, the use of first-person declaration, the prophecy structure. He was writing for posterity. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. Brown understood something about the Southern psychology that few Northerners grasped. He knew the South's greatest fear wasn't abolition through politics, it was slave rebellion. By arming himself and attempting to arm slaves, by creating even the specter of organized black resistance, he touched the raw nerve of Southern paranoia. Think about the timing. In 1831, Nat Turner's rebellion had killed 60 whites and resulted in the execution of over 100 slaves. That trauma still haunted the South. Brown knew this. His raid wasn't dangerous because of what he accomplished. He took a single armory in a small town. It was dangerous because of what it represented, the possibility that someone might successfully organize and arm the enslaved population. Modern psychological operations, experts studying Brown's tactics note, he created what's called a preference cascade. This is when people who privately hold beliefs suddenly realize others share those beliefs and begin acting on them. The South's reaction to Brown proved his point. They mobilized militia, they demanded new laws, they threatened secession. Why such extreme response to 22 men? Because Brown had proven that their nightmare scenario was possible. Northern reaction was equally telling. Many who'd been moderates suddenly had to choose sides. Brown's execution turned him into a martyr. Songs were written. His name became a battle cry. When Union soldiers marched into battle 2 years later, they sang John Brown's body. He'd successfully planted an idea that grew beyond his control, or perhaps exactly according to plan. Some researchers now believe Brown studied crowd psychology and mass movements. He'd witnessed revolutions in thought, the spread of abolitionism, the Second Great Awakening's religious fervor. He understood that ideas don't spread through logic alone. They spread through symbols, through stories, through sacrifice. Could Brown have been applying these principles deliberately? His methodical preparation suggests yes. Now we arrive at the most controversial discovery about John Brown. Evidence suggesting he may have been part of a broader network of radical abolitionists who understood that peaceful dissolution of slavery was impossible, and that calculated provocation was necessary. In 2017, researchers at the Massachusetts Historical Society discovered encrypted portions of letters between Brown and the Secret Six, wealthy abolitionists who funded his activities. Using modern cryptographic analysis, they decoded discussions about necessary theater and forcing the crisis. Frederick Douglass, who met with Brown months before the raid, later wrote that Brown wanted to create a situation that would make gradual emancipation impossible. Douglass refused to join, calling it suicidal. But what if suicide was precisely the point? Here's where the evidence becomes startling. Architectural analysis of Brown's movements at Harper's Ferry reveals he could have escaped multiple times in the first 12 hours. Local knowledge of mountain paths, darkness providing cover, confusion among authorities, he had opportunities. Instead, he remained in the engine house, holding hostages, sending out manifestos. When Robert E. Lee arrived with federal troops, Brown negotiated for hours. Hostage negotiation experts reviewing the transcripts note he wasn't trying to secure escape terms. He was creating memorable dialogue. The numbers tell the story. Brown's raid lasted 36 hours. 10 of his men died, including both his sons. 7 were captured and executed. 5 escaped, but were later caught. Only 1 man made it to freedom. For someone who'd successfully evaded capture in Kansas for years, this failure rate is suspicious. Modern military historians calculate he should have achieved at least 60% survival if escape was the goal. Unless it wasn't. But here's the revelation that changes everything. Brown's last words before execution weren't spontaneous. Researchers found drafts, multiple versions in his prison cell writings. He workshopped his martyrdom speech. He tested different phrasings. The final version he handed to a guard. I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood, was draft number 7. The mathematical precision is stunning. Exactly 16 months after Brown's execution, South Carolina seceded. 4 months after that, Fort Sumter was fired upon. 36 months after Brown's death, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Could Brown have calculated these dominoes? His letters suggest he understood political pressure points with remarkable clarity. Archaeological examination of the engine house where Brown made his stand revealed something unexpected. Carved into a brick, hidden behind a water barrel, investigators found, "The truth requires blood." It's in Brown's handwriting. Carbon dating confirms it was made during the siege. He was documenting his own sacrifice in real time, leaving evidence for future historians. Some scholars now propose Brown understood catalytic events, moments that accelerate history. The raid itself killed only 5 people, but it set in motion a chain reaction that killed 620,000 in the Civil War. Ancient strategists understood leverage points. Modern chaos theory calls them butterfly effects. Brown found the exact spot to push American society where it would topple toward war. Whether through genius or intuition or divine guidance, as he claimed, he succeeded. The question historians now debate: was John Brown a prophet who saw the future, or an architect who built it? What happened to the full truth about John Brown's network and planning? Why do textbooks still teach the madman narrative when evidence suggests sophisticated psychological operation? The answer might be uncomfortable. After the Civil War, America needed reconciliation. The North wanted to believe they'd fought for noble reasons: freedom, union, morality. The South wanted to believe they'd fought for states' rights and honor. Neither side wanted to acknowledge that the war might have been deliberately engineered by a small group of radical activists who believed violence was the only solution. Brown's letters were scattered, hidden, or destroyed. The Secret Six fled to Canada when investigation threatened. Frederick Douglass burned his correspondence with Brown. Why erase the evidence? Some historians suggest it's because the full truth revealed uncomfortable questions about democratic process, moral certainty, and the ethics of calculated violence for righteous ends. In 1865, one of Brown's surviving raiders claimed there were detailed written plans for the entire operation, not just Harper's Ferry, but the intended war that would follow. These documents were supposedly hidden in a safe house in Ohio. They've never been found. Were they destroyed? Hidden? Or did someone decide that Americans shouldn't know their greatest moral triumph might have been orchestrated? The madman narrative served everyone. It allowed the war to be about principles rather than manipulation. But what if the truth is more complex and more challenging? So here we stand, over 160 years later, still debating whether John Brown was a hero or a terrorist, a prophet or a madman. But perhaps we're asking the wrong question. Maybe the real question is this: if you knew with absolute certainty that a great evil could only be ended through calculated violence and personal sacrifice, would you have the courage to become the spark? Brown believed he heard God's voice commanding action. Whether you believe in divine mandate or human moral clarity, he acted on his convictions with complete commitment. His body lies moldering in the grave, but his truth keeps marching on. Did he save America by forcing it to confront its deepest sin? Or did he show us something uncomfortable about how moral progress actually happens? Not through patient debate, but through those willing to bleed for truth. What do you think? Was John Brown the man who sparked the Civil War, or the man who revealed a war already burning beneath the surface, waiting for someone brave enough to expose the flames?